to. And this is a different format, but for me, it kind of feels like a fireside chat, which I really actually love. And so yes, I guess Homeless to Harvard in a way sums it up. But, you know, in this changed format, I will, to give context, I see we have I can see the attendees, at least by number. Hi, and I know you're out there. So yeah, for anyone who's going, who is this woman and what is this story? I'll give some bullet points and background of the passion and the circumstances that brought me here. So I was, you know, raised in the Bronx in New York City, which I'm very proud of. And I was born into a family where my parents were, I would say, like very loving, but also severely drug addicted. And so my life began, you know, with my parents using drugs so severely that I was in fact born with drugs in my system. My father was in prison. We had a lot of adversity. And I grew up in an apartment filled with love, but limitations. And we were often short on food and basic necessities. So I often, you know, especially because today I work with youth, I often like to explain to people that when you want to think about the long-term impact of things like this, the best way I know how to sort of convey it to folks with us today, from my heart to yours, is you want to think about the development and sort of the psychology that you inherit in these environments. And I inherited many beautiful lessons. However, the adversity also gave me a deeper sense of, you know, when you have to figure out, what will I eat today? How can we keep the lights on? Overhearing our parents have a conversation about whether or not we're buying candles or paying the electric bill, you sort of grow into this idea about survival being the highest possibility. And I believe people grow into the conversations that you create around them. And that's not just sort of like an idea from the neck up, it's something you practice. So I grew up scrounging around, figuring things out, and in a sense, becoming independent and resilient, but also, unfortunately, for some time, having this idea that maybe the highest possibility in my life was to just kind of figure out how to survive a crisis, right? And as time went on with drug use, you know, it can be very severe. And if it doesn't get treated, things tend to get worse. So there was an escalation. And I like to tell people, because sometimes, and especially because I can't see your faces, I'm like, who are these folks? You know, I know you're on here, but I worry that people sort of hear what I'm saying and feel sorry. But I do like to just pause for one moment to explain that the struggles were very real, but there was good with the bad. It's often been said, right, the good and the bad happen side by side. And my mother would, you know, sit at the foot of my bed sharing her dreams with me. You know, she called me Lizzie. My daddy would take, you know, my dad would go, you know, take me to the library and we would check out stacks of books, which he never returned to the library, which I often, you know, I don't recommend, but we had a few aliases at the New York Public Library. And we had this strange mix of sort of the refrigerator being empty, not attending school, not having clean clothing, but reading these books my dad would bring home, getting tucked in by my mother at night, and sort of being held to the best of their ability. And in a sense, I took away from that this idea that, you know, people can't give you what they don't have. And I think that I moved forward in my life without a sense too much of blame. And I think that that helped. There was devastation, right? I will not minimize it, especially working with youth. We don't want to do that. But I think that sometimes people will hear that either your childhood was one way or another, black or white, good or bad. And as I said, they happen mixed together and they're unexpected takeaways. And I think later on, when I ended up homeless as a teenager, you know, something about that bedrock of relationship and love, I mean, even to this day, and in every circumstance of my life has carried me through. We also had a neighbor who lived above us by the name of Arthur, who was, now I know as an adult, you call him, he was a mentor, right? But I called him Uncle Arthur. And he was the neighbor who used to bring pots of food to our doorstep because he was friends with our parents. He would catch me cutting school outside and go get in the car. And he had this old Dodge where, you know, it was so beat up. It was, you know, Gail, like the Flintstones, you could literally see, like actually we had cardboard on it, but he would drive me to school because he was so close with my parents. And he'd look at me and I swear, you know, Liz, you're going to change lives one day. I don't know, you know, Liz, one day you're going to make a big difference. And I just have to get you to school so you can do that. And I remember looking at him like it was nuts, right? And treating me like I was so interesting, like I'm 11 years old. He's treating me like I'm Plato, right? Like, wow, you're so fascinating, you know? And yet now as an adult, I look back, and again, I will bring it home to the point that people will grow into the conversations you create around them. So if you sort of jump forward, I found myself in my adolescence, look, especially during this time, Gail, the pandemic, people losing so much right now. I think more and more, and at one stage of our lives, really all of us, we will know what it feels like to have the floor fall out from under us. Mm-hmm. Everything that you thought was a certain way is just suddenly different. And how do you reconcile that? I was a adolescent, and my parents got very sick. We lost our apartment, lost touch with my father. He went to a homeless shelter. I went off to group homes. My mother was kind of languishing away in the hospital. They were very sick with HIV and AIDS before the medications that are available now. And very suddenly, my beloved Arthur, who was my mentor, he had a heart attack. He passed away. So in a year's time, I ended up as an adolescent, sleeping on the streets, losing my family, burying my mother the day after Christmas when I just turned 16. And the loss, even as I tell you now in this, crazy format on a, laptop, right, in 2020, even as I'm talking to you now, I can feel it. It's a felt sense in my body and my bones of this line of demarcation of before and after. And as I slept in hallways and didn't know what was next, and I thought about, should I go back to school? I was a dropout. I've been sleeping on my friends' couches. I've been sleeping in Central Park. What would I do next? These moments of going this way or that way, this voice would come up in the back of my head, just sort of nudging me. I think we all have it. I know I don't know who's on the call again, or I don't know a lot of you personally, but I always like to say, that voice you have in the back of your head that kind of pushes you, that no matter what it is you are doing right this moment, it helps you know what you should be doing, right? And it keeps you like a compass, right? And it's also the part of you that dreams about what could be. Sometimes I call it the what if, but in a positive way, I would think, well, what if? What if I went back to school? What if I worked? What if? And I distinctly remember sleeping with my backpack as my pillow in a hallway, hanging out with my friends in the Bronx, looking at sort of this trajectory or that trajectory, and that voice kind of coming back to me. I'm going to help people. I'm going to change lives. I've got to go to school. People will grow into the conversations you create around them. I went back to school while I was homeless. I was very lucky to find an amazing team of teachers. Public education saved my life. Teachers saved my life. A second set of mentors and beautiful teachers. And I hid my homelessness while I went to high school. And there are many ups and downs to talk about in another time, but I will say this. I was able to maintain an A average in high school. I found out about a nonprofit in my community in New York City that caters to homeless youth. And while I was in a mix of sleeping in friends' houses, Central Park, staircases, I would go to this wonderful high school, this wonderful nonprofit, and get pantry packs filled with food from the nonprofit, dental care, counseling, art therapy, and go to this lovely high school and then just hide my homelessness. And with that fabric of support that made it possible, I was able to squeeze all four years of high school into 2 with an A average, and while homeless. And I didn't think, oh, I'm going to go apply to Harvard, right? But my wonderful teachers, they decided to take us on a field trip to Boston. I went, we walked through Harvard Yard, and we were there for a picture in front of the statue. And I don't mean to sound like Forrest Gump to I was stood there and I thought I would go, but there was just something about, I very sort of, stupidly, it's like, well, is it so hard to get into it? I remember my teacher saying, oh, it'd be a reach, but it's not possible. And I think the reason I take a moment in this short little format to distill that is because here's what I think happens to us, right, Gail? I think that there's so many signals from the world around us about how we should interpret our adversity, who we should be. People telling us that, that your life is bad, your childhood is tragic, everything happening to you is just terrible. And it almost can become like a current. And think about right now, I don't know about you, but I'm in the middle of conversations where everyone around me, I wake up, I get my coffee, and then if I'm not careful, my neighbors, even my husband, I'm guilty of it too. We all go, here's today's bad news, right? And what people grow into the conversations you create around them. And ultimately you grow into that conversation yourself. I had to decide what my circumstances, the meaning of those circumstances were, rather than them being defined for me. And I did that, I think, through relationships of dedicated, caring people, and the acknowledgement that if I didn't decide it, the world would decide it for me. I was able to go to Harvard on a scholarship. People from around the country mailed me care packages. A woman stitched, I didn't know folks from a hole in the wall. They sent me a woman, I'm still in touch with her, Debbie Fike. She sent me a quilt. You don't forget the people who helped you. And she wrote me a note, having read about me in the newspaper. You were homeless, you're going to Harvard. Well, it turns out this lovely woman I don't know, as one example, she sent me a quilt she stitched because that's what she did for all her daughters when they went to college. And she said, yes, I still have this woman, she's lovely, Gail. And she said, it gets cold in those dorms. May you be warmed by knowing that people care about you.
Oh.
You know, yes. Yeah. And I was a little bit hood at the time, you know, from the Bronx. I was all, you know, what are these people? I don't have anything to give them back. Right. And that was really about not feeling, you know, worthy. I don't know, Gail, I'm seeing you and I'm getting emotional because I mean it from my heart. I really do. Like today, you know, I helped to co-found an organization called the Arthur Project. You know, we bring relationship-based mentoring to middle school students in the Bronx. What does that mean? That means that our kids get 500 hours of mentoring in our program with therapeutic mentors, people who are studying to be clinicians, working very closely with our kids. And I'm being as quick as I can to just tell you that at some point in my life, I realized the connection between the love that was given to me as a child, not only by my parents who would have given me more if they could have, and I love them. I lost my mother, she died. I lost my father, he died. Like I lost my family, but that love was there. When Arthur, being the neighbor who never looked away, he died very suddenly. I lost him, right? But I could take that with me, these teachers, this nonprofit. And then I come to be an adult and I sort of realized that it's not really success unless it creates opportunities for other people. And most importantly, that you could take the worst things that ever happened to you and the deepest loss and not let the circumstance be the end of the story. But if I lean into those things that are hurting me so badly and not try to ignore them, could I make something beautiful out of them? Can I be stronger in the broken places, right? And I took that and said, well, I'm going to have I'm married now, I have 2 kids. My son's name is Liam Arthur, and we have the Arthur Project. So my commitment going forward is to pass on what was done for me and to not be defined by my circumstances.
You know, Liz, you always seem to have such an acceptance of adversity. Do you think that acceptance ties to your resiliency?
Oh, yes. So, okay. I'm so glad that you, like, the listening was there and you hear it in that particular way, Gail, because yes. So I think the first thing is the word resilience is thrown around quite a bit. And I think it's really misunderstood. The first piece about it, really just in general to kind of put in your back pocket, is we think it's white knuckle and pushing through and willpower. And how many emotions have you had since you woke up this morning? I can't, right? I don't have that much coffee in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And there's not. Instead, I want to offer the idea that flexibility is the basis of resilience, right? It's the idea that doesn't have to look that way, just do the next right thing. And to get there, acceptance is key. Because, you know, in a sense, here's the gift that my adversity gave me, right? I would never want anyone to take my pain away from me. My adversity told me terrible things happen. That's how life is. It's like Scott Peck is my favorite. It's my favorite book is The Road Less Traveled,
Yes.
Dr. Scott Peck, right? The first sentence in the book, if you haven't read it, folks, I highly recommend. Life is difficult. And then, you know, it kind of makes you laugh. Thanks, buddy. But then he goes on to say that it really is, that's not the surprise. The surprise is that we would ever expect it not to be. So yes, acceptance is the first piece. And then when you have acceptance, it allows you to move to the next piece, which is, and this is all supported by research, not just my notions, right? Is that I think when people build resilience as a skill set, they hone the ability to sort out things they can control and can't control, right? My mom gave me one of her Narcotics Anonymous coins with the Serenity Prayer on it once, which is kind of like a funny thing to get when you're 11, right? But, you know, it's very simple. The prayer is to just grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. I thought it looked like a treasure coin. I was 11, but I kept it in my pocket, and I grew to understand that the second piece of resilience is distinguishing what you can and cannot control. And finally, the last piece is that that will give you access to gratitude. It's just about then being able to focus on what you do have and what you can do instead of always kind of lamenting your losses.
If you had to distill gratitude down into just a small nutshell of a definition, what would it be?
Oh, I would borrow my favorite definition from my poet friend, Travis Montez. He's a dear friend of mine in New York City. He nails it. And it's it's simple. He always said to me, oh, Liz, people overcomplicate gratitude. You know, gratitude is nothing more than realizing that every single thing you have, you could just as easily not have it. And when you understand that, not as an idea from the neck up, but right, like a marriage between your head and your heart, you'll slow down a little bit and you'll love a little harder. You'll try a little more and you'll appreciate what you do have.
That's awesome. I have so many things I want to ask you, but we're getting some questions from our listeners.
Sure. Yeah.
One is Judy Dew, and I happen to know Judy very well, and I know that she just read your book, Breaking Nine, and she's curious if you have connected with your half sister.
Oh yeah. So, and first of all, Judy, right? Hi, Judy. How are you? So yeah, what's so crazy now is to think of that book and the time frame that it covers, right? Because guess what? I don't even think of Meredith as my half sister anymore. So in my family, my father for those who don't know, my father had a previous marriage, and I have a sister that's about 12 years older. And it was, you know, when you have those fuzzy childhood memories of meeting and then you can't quite glue it all together. Meredith is a fundamental part of my life now as an adult. We reconnected when she had my niece, Ray, who is now, oh my gosh, 15. So Meredith and I are very close, and it's been, I would say, not only that she's my sister, but my dear friend.
Oh, that's awesome. I also see a note here from someone that I used to work with a long time ago at EDS. His name is Ted Lang, and he just simply commented that it's very inspiring. And I
Thank you, Ted.
More. Thank
you so much.
Liz, you briefly mentioned earlier the importance of Arthur in your life, and that you now have this nonprofit. As a nonprofit leader, because I was noticing that those who registered, and there's several people with us today who are running nonprofits, can you share anything as an executive director about how we handle this situation, particularly fundraisers, because so many nonprofits were planning on their annual fundraiser and it got postponed, and it's getting postponed again. Can they do things virtually? Do you have any thoughts for our fellow nonprofits?
Well, first of all, from one nonprofit co-founder to other founders and direct, my heart to you, because I know how deeply we care about the outcomes for the clients we serve. And when the pandemic hit, I don't know about any of you, I went, oh my goodness, because here's the thing. I had a plan for all of our fundraising for the year, and it was this date and this place and that time and what have you. And then the floor fell out. But I quickly bounced back and said, you know what? Of course it did, because that's life. And what we've been able to do, we've been really successful with a great team of people at the Arthur Project, a development director, a new executive director that I'm working with, and I'm still helping to run the organization extensively day to day. Well, we all sat together, pulled up our chairs and said, okay, the plan we had before is no longer appropriate for what we're doing. And I think that's the first thing, is we kept trying to think about how the rigid plan we had fits into now. And it was like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Right. And then I realized, oh, I know this. I have to actually be responsive to what happens. So the first thing we did was we went ahead and changed the narrative of, and really the approach of what we're doing. How can we at the Arthur Project fundamentally reshape what we're doing to serve our clients in the time of COVID? Then that language and those proposals went into our grants. And yes, we've been really successful with being able to connect with folks virtually. So I would say a couple of things. If you're no longer going to have your big wine and cheese thing or your luncheon, have a mixer on Zoom and keep your folks connected to what you're doing. There are people who are your supporters already. They love you. They care about your clients. Round them up and just regularly have touch points to share how you're pivoting and ask for their ideas and feedback. When they're incorporated, return to the folks, show gratitude for that advice, and change your fundraising narratives and your approach to be appropriate to the pandemic. There are so many funders right now who are scrapping what they were going to fund before, and they go, how do we respond to the pandemic? We should all be thinking about flexing, as I mentioned, that flexibility, and have an appropriate response in your organization, and then have the fundraising match, and then round people up for fireside chats. People will come along.
We have someone, Cindy Wade, and she says that you spoke at their biggest fundraiser a few years ago, Pot of Gold Luncheon. And this year, do you remember that, Liz?
Yes. Hi, Cindy. Hi, how are you? Oh, it's just such a cool thing. All right, who else is on the line?
And she said this year they, for their Pot of Gold Luncheon, they did do it virtually. And she's like, yes, it is possible. So that's good for
wonderful.
everyone.
Yeah. And by the way, Gail, being sensitive to time, I'm truncating my answer. I could do an hour just on that because it's multifaceted, multi-tiered. There's a lot there, but it is, I want people to know it is highly possible. And we've been very successful at it so far, thankfully.
We have another fan, Sunny. She said that you spoke at their fundraiser in 2018, which was Rainbow Days. And she just says, thank you for being so inspiring. We loved having you as our speaker.
Thank you so much. You're already going to get sick of me. Here I am back again, right on your screen. Thank you for coming and say hello today. And I hope you all are doing well during the pandemic.
Ted Lang, who earlier, I just thought he was saying you were inspiring, but he actually has a specific question. He again wants to thank you for sharing. And he's curious if you could reflect back, Liz, on one or two particularly difficult barriers or obstacles that you had to face down and overcome, and describe how did you fight your way through it?
Oh, wow. What a beautiful question. And thank you so much, Ted. I think that, okay, so there's a psychological piece and there's a practical piece having to do with community. The psychological piece is, I think sometimes the fear that we have when things are going wrong is, when you start feeling those feelings of dread, is it just me, right? Like, does anyone else look at the news and go, oh my God, right? It's almost too much. My instinct, if I'm not careful, is to feel that pain and not want to feel it and avoid it. That's my go-to, right? So I have to be on to myself that that's happening, and to realize that by avoiding it, I'm actually really, they say you resist, it persists, right? That's not going to help anything. That in fact, I won't die if I sit with how I feel, it turns out. And I can sit there and move through it and, in a sense, acknowledge. So I think the first thing is to acknowledge that you are even dealing with something, because I think I pour caffeine on it myself. I don't know about all of you. Your food of whatever choice, or my feelings taste like coffee, but I over caffeinate, I ignore. So then I learn to stop, pause, acknowledge, and once again accept. And once then I am able to articulate it, I'll even write it down. I am going through this issue. I may be having some PTSD from my childhood. Whatever it is, I label it. Then once I label it, I seek support. So I look for that community. I learned by the experiences I've already shared with you that not only could I not do what I do alone, I can't, right? There's no reason to. So you build an appropriate support base and you reach out to them. And I tend to surround myself with people who are always in a place of seeking, and they're looking to improve. So I bounce ideas off of them. I'm not afraid to get therapy if I need it, and to be able to reach out for help. But you can't do that. You can't skip over and ask of someone else something you have not given yourself first. So the acknowledgement there is key, languaging it, and then seeking support. That's a quick way. I have, again, if we had time, right? But that's one quick, mental pivot that I call on every day. And a simple question grounds me, which if it's useful to you, Ted, I want to offer it to you. Whatever I'm doing, if it is too much, of something like thinking about something that's making me sad, or, too much Netflix or whatever I'm doing to avoid that day, I'll say to myself, is this hurting me or helping me? Does this hurt or help? Hurt or help? And if it hurts, you have to draw the will to say enough, because if you don't do that, nothing can do that for you, right? You have to assert that. So is it hurting me or is this helping me will often be your guide.
Great. John Way is curious, who are the people, Liz, that inspire you today? Oh
my gosh. Wow. What a beautiful question. Well, I think I've made it clear that Arthur, right, is kind of my big one. I think that will be my whole lifetime. My children inspire me as well. They ask me questions that stop me in my tracks. And I realize that in that serve and return of conversation between us, they're growing into their personhood, and that teaches me every day. James Baldwin is a big hero of mine. Big hero of mine, my favorite author, Maya Angelou. And you know what, Gail, you and I were chatting before, and I know this sounds right. I'm talking about these big historical figures, but Robin Roberts, I know, listen, everyone sign up for masterclass. Robin Roberts lately has been getting me through the pandemic. She has a beautiful masterclass and many interviews, and I find her deeply inspiring and grounded, and just to be a beautiful soul. So if you were to see me in my home, in my kitchen, doing something, I either have her playing, or I have speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King, who I love. I listen to Maya Angelou's audiobooks, but I surround myself with the energy of people whose lives and perspectives I admire. And I that's the song to which I have my day, is like the people I look up to. And I actually have like a list that is beyond the time we have here. But I would say high up there, Robin Roberts, Martin Luther King, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou.
All right. I know we're almost out of time, but Dan Raviv is someone that I love, who has a long history in reporting, and I just can't ignore his question, Liz. So he says, Liz, your spirit and enthusiasm are terrific. I have kind of a tough question these days for anyone in the public eye. The new focus on racial justice. Changes that changes that companies and organizations are announcing to be more sensitive to racial minorities. Is that impacting your work and the organizations that you're in touch with? Sorry, Dan.
I'm so glad. I mean, I know folks are, have a time thing. Like, please give him my email, because I have so much to talk about in this area. Yes, and yes. So how to say this? I'm trying to pick the 90-second version. I don't even say. So you might have noticed the authors I just cited were very rooted in these conversations. And a big piece of that is, I think that it's people, I think when we talk about, for instance, diversity and inclusion, because we're talking about it from an organizational perspective, right? At the Arthur Project, we somehow, just by reaching out to the people closest to us, for instance, we created a very homogenous board. Go on our website, thearthurproject.org. It's changing now. But even the background that I come from, right? So I looked up one day and I went, wait, that's not right. Where are the folks from the community we serve? And how can we build equity and social mobility in the lives of youth if we don't reflect it internally? So one question that I'm sitting with now is, if you are at the helm of an organization, and that organization has a stated social good in its mission, let's say it's equity, let's say it's a more just society, whatever it may be, turn right around with that mirror. That's like the uncomfortable work. And then we have to look within before we look without. Can you create these things in the world if you don't have them internally? So I'm dealing with that now, and we're going through a rigorous strategic planning and DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility strategic planning process in my organization. But I'm doing deep work on myself, reading through a whole syllabus of authors now. I literally could talk for hours about it, and I know we need to wrap up. It is profoundly important to me, and I do believe that factors around race, not only class, but race, have shaped my life. Yeah.
Liz, I could listen to you all day, and I just want to encourage anyone that is listening, if your organization has a need to bring Liz in, please give GDA speakers a call. Liz is ready to present virtually until we can all gather again for in-person events. So give us a call and we can help arrange that. And if you've enjoyed this, follow GDA speakers on social media. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another Motivational Monday on July 27th with Kevin Brown, who discusses the hero effect. Liz, thank you.
Thank you, Gail. So much. This has been, thank you for just a bright spot in my day, and just for this opportunity to be in conversation, and I hope to see some of you in your organizations. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And Gail, I'm going to be tuning into your Motivational Mondays. So you give me, yeah, they're awesome. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Goodbye, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Everyone.
Bye.